Victoria 3 has changed today, and Shookvic is back to run us through all of the different changes that have arrived in the Earl Grey update, Update 1.1. Changes from buffs and nerfs to wages, population and UI overhauls, AI and resource balancing. There's a lot to cover, and I'm going to show you it in this video. If you like what you see, consider dropping a like, and let's just jump straight into it. For starters, we're going to look at the first thing on the list, which is the changes to how government and legitimacy works. But as you can see, there's quite a few key changes to run through, and it's those key ones that I'll be focusing on in this video. Let's dive into legitimacy first then, and you'll notice now that this government, the Brazilian government from the start of the game, I'll jump around through a few different perspectives throughout the video, is currently an unacceptable government. It only has the intelligentsia in it, and it's suffering a penalty as a result, or more importantly, it's missing out on some of these bonuses. A righteous government will enact laws now 50% faster than any other. As you move down the list, though, through unacceptable governments, you start to take a significant penalty. It gets a little interesting when you're actually moving them around, because now, of course, you can hover over it like I'm doing here to get a feel for exactly who's going to be suffering. A thing to note that opposition interests, those left out of government, will take an approval hit, and your radicalism or loyalism will fluctuate as well. Unacceptable governments will cause radicalism, and of course the more popular ones will bring loyalism into the fold. There are a variety of other things that can affect it as well. You might have seen me throw some up on screen while I've been talking. This is around the ideological coherence of the groups. The penalties that are applied, I have found in my early testing at least, are more impactful later in the game, when ideologies, or I should say, that the penalties worsen as that ideological gap begins to widen. You'll notice, even in the early game, it can be a little difficult. However, you can still absolutely, in some cases at least, throw everybody in there and get a maximum legit government. Will they stall on legislation? Maybe. But you can get your legitimacy fairly high, fairly easily. However, like I say, it matters on their clout. It matters on the loyalism and support, and crucially, the fundamental thing that could hold people back here as well are the laws that govern society. Are there lots of ideological laws in place? What's your voting system? Are you a democracy? Because votes will matter more in the new legitimacy calculations that have arrived inside of Victoria 3. Wages are one of the things that have been changed a lot, and they're back again with more changes, and these are the most significant ones we've seen. We'll also talk resources and morale a little bit later in the video. Firstly, let's have a look at the government wages, and you can see that we now get an extra authority boost. This is actually quite big, 5 and 10% respectively. On the downside, of course, we're suffering those same penalties that we were before. On the military side, it's armed forces approval, but also their wages and their training rate. And at the high end, we'll start to get more power projection. All of these things will, of course, play into morale and the strength of your army at the lower end. We'll talk more on that in a minute, though. And at the higher end, you'll be looking at your prestige and your global ranking. Now, on the resources front, and I've covered this extensively in a separate video when they announced it, you'll notice that oil extraction has changed considerably. One more time, here is the old. And as we move through, they're trying to make it more available because it was too harsh on the player's experience, apparently, earlier. They've also added a production method for rubber, which should make that easier too. As we move through, I'd now like to talk about UI improvements and changes, crucially to the population details screen, but a few others as well. Notifications have been reworked and a few other things. It's the population screen that has seen the most attention, and in my opinion, this is a job that is not yet done. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. At the moment, if you want to try and figure out the needs of your population, which are so important for what you should be building or buying or trading for, I can't stress that enough, but that is a separate tips video in its own right. It could be very difficult to find it anyway. Navigate to the market screen, the pop screens, it's all difficult, it's buried behind a wall of text. What they've done is revamped the user interface a little bit here. If you click into a territory or navigate to a specific population group, here you can see I'm looking at my clergymen, you can get a feeling for the goods that they need right up front now on their population panel. Here they are, what proportion of their budget is it taking up, and the little money icon there, of course, reflecting what the price is like. And that will help us address shortfalls that are affecting all of our populations. We also get their consumption proportion here as well. You'll notice that the poorer groups are more interested, of course, in services, clothing, tools, that kind of thing. And as I navigate through here, I find it still a little difficult to get to these tabs, despite them being fantastic, really. And finally, of course, as we look at more wealthy individuals, we get a feeling for how this plays out in game. We can see that they are much more interested in services and clothing and porcelain. What a time to be alive, huh? Notifications have changed a little bit as well. You should see more important ones popping up at the top of your screen, and hopefully the real messages will get through to you as a result. Also, some other user interfaces have changed. This was one in particular, the builder one. I tend to have very long build queues, unfortunately, from time to time, and so this was one that I noticed in particular for me. You may find others as you move through. Speaking of moving through, let's move through now to talk about the reworked morale, the second part of those wages and other changes that we discussed at the start of the video. I'll need more time to playtest the morale changes specifically, maybe a future video reflecting on the patch once I've had a few days to sit down and really delve into the detail myself. But for now, morale system has changed actually quite significantly. Previously, unfortunately, there were issues around battles being long and drawn out, battalions perishing from attrition where they weren't even fighting. In the new system, they're aiming to take that down a notch and speed up battles. Losers, by the way, typically took the side with the most morale damage. Now, units on both sides will take some. The basis for the morale damage that they take will be determined by their organization, right? So their production methods, the gear they have, that kind of thing, but also, of course, their preparedness. The more modern the method of warfare, the lower the loss of morale. Conscripts, by the way, now also differ from regular battalions in that they suffer more morale damage. So you can see that they're adding different layers of complexity. Subtly, of course, we are expecting wider changes to come to the military system next year. But these iterative changes to the morale system all seem pretty good. The modifiers that can affect your morale, from first aid to field hospitals, or bad conditions as well, right? Broken supply lines, or commander traits. All in all, it comes together with the wage increases to present a fairly formidable change, although like I say, I'll need a bit more time to really get into the detail. Next up, we have changes across the board to the AI. All sorts of things have been adjusted to the AI's behavior. Again, this is one that's difficult to talk about in 12 hours after the patch has come out. We'll need to test this further to see if it's actually worked, but here is a long list of the changes that were included in the full patch notes. If you'd like to hear those, I have a separate video on them, or of course, if you're a reader, you nerd, they'll be linked below. Moving swiftly along, though, the AI changes were a lot around how nations unified or came together, the Confederation of Australia and Canada. Also, the AI's behavior. It's less likely to make foolish errors, and it's more likely to take better advantage of its cash. Maybe that means by using its investment pool more readily when it's running out of money. Or alternatively, it could be how the AI handles peace deals, when it chooses to fight, and how. Lots of interesting stuff. But again, the proof will be in the pudding. Speaking of the pudding, if you were furious with the bugs and glitches, we have some changes on them as well. The first one was listed as a feature. I would contest that a little bit. It's that treaty ports will no longer function if the owner's power rank is not greater than the market owner's, ensuring that great powers can't use them to get access to markets outside of their own. This one is really important, and thank you, by the way, to the commenters who pointed this out specifically to me last time. There are instances where France, for example, can use a treaty port to get access to the great British market, of course, Britain being ranked 1 and France being ranked number 2. This is pretty contentious because it gives France, in this case, in this example, a massive ability to use a fairly simple thing like a treaty port to gain access to their entire market. That has been plugged. A variety of other bug fixes and crashes, of course, have also been fixed and plugged in this update. Much like the changes to the AI, though, these will take a little bit of time. And, of course, with any update, more danger could have been introduced in the process. A friendly reminder that you might want to play on the previous version if you have some existing save files still going, although it could work perfectly fine as well. As you can see, the long list of bug fixes was just that. It was pretty long. If we look into the detail a little bit, there's a variety of things. A lot of them are around calculations, so the game is simplifying things on the back end to hopefully not only fix broken issues, but also fix some performance as well. Speaking of performance, the final performer was, of course, the minor bug fixes. Now, I went through the detail on these lists in a video last week. I won't dwell through them here. In a nutshell, if you don't want to pause and read it, there have been a variety of issues fixed, from militarism to statehood, but a lot of those minor ones are just that. They're fairly small. Unlike what happened to me here, where I declared war on the Central Americas and then they decided to break up, and now I'm stuck in a tiny war with El Salvador that I can't end. Bug? Question mark? Either way, there will be a few issues as I mentioned earlier, so do take care. Here's one that they highlighted last week in the full patch notes. Speaking of which, again, if you'd like to read them, they'll be linked below, or had a video covering them in more of a granular detail last week, where of course I couldn't show the changes, but we could talk about a lot of the information. Speaking of talking about information, this may very well be one of the last times that we cover Victoria 3 here. It looks to me like this is the final patch for the year, and the next free patch 1.2 will be coming out next year. However, the development is absolutely not over. And I will continue to cover Victoria 3 news and update releases. I actually really enjoy making this kind of coverage, so long as you enjoy watching it. Thanks very much for joining me today. Good luck out there with patch 1.1, named, of course, aptly after a cup of tea. It's the Earl Grey update. Enjoy, let me know how you go. I'll see you next time.